que lo que veremos hoy día es fantástico. Más fuerte el aplauso, por favor. Para irme relajando porque no sé qué está lo que voy a decir. Ya. Señores, quiero dar la bienvenida a nuestras autoridades. Rodrigo, Carlos Eugenio Lavín, don Federico Valdés. Usted se ha dado cuenta que la gente que haciendo primeras filas son como autoridades, pero uno a veces no sabe estos otros nombres, así que a todas las autoridades yo les quiero dar la bienvenida. El alcalde, el primer ministro, etc. También, ¿eh? Estimados, ¿no saben el orgullo que me da? Veo algunos exalumnos, Federico Junior, el estar acá. Quiero agradecer también a los auspiciadores, Red Bull, ¿no es cierto? Everlast, Vive Deporte. Pero estaba diciendo que el orgullo que me da de estar en este ring. Les voy a contar algunas anécdotas. Hoy día se enfrentará Tina contra Michael. Y el referee será nada menos que Álvaro Fischer, presidente, hay cosas que se me olvidan, de Fundación Chile. Este ring no lo hemos visto en ninguna parte del mundo. O sea, lo primero que tenemos que hacer es felicitar a la Facultad de Ingeniería, a la Facultad de Negocios y a la Facultad de Diseño de haber creado este ring, porque es la primera vez en el mundo y seguramente nos copiarán como siempre copiamos nosotros a los demás. ¿Qué más digo? Ya. Los días jueves, no se vean. Los días sábados y domingos hay una obra de teatro que se llama Tarzán 3D a las 5 de la tarde, que ustedes pueden ir a ver, y todos los que digan que vieron este gran evento van gratis. Ahí va un aplauso también. ¿Dónde? En el Teatro de Lo Barnechea, donde mi querido alcalde Guevara, ¿cómo se llama? Felipe Guevara, mi querido alcalde que me facilitó sus dependencias para hacer mi obra de teatro. Señores, fuera de broma, creo que estar en este momento aquí será inolvidable. ¿Ustedes habían visto un encuentro de creatividad en un ring? Nunca. Es por eso. Siempre uno se le olvida felicitar a los organizadores, a las personas que estuvieron detrás de todo esto, a la persona que puso esto.
Máscara contra máscara.
Y eso se llama trabajar en equipo. Porque si es que alguien no hubiese puesto esta carpa, estas luces, simplemente esto que no tengo idea cómo se llama, esto no existiría. Trabajar en equipo, señores. Yo soy profesor de emprendimiento y me siento orgullosísimo de trabajar en la mejor universidad de este país, que es la Universidad del Desarrollo.
Sin palabras. Está bien. Le paga además. ¿Va a cobrar más?
Federico Valdés me asienta con la cabeza y ríe. Eso es un buen indicio. Señores, de verdad, se los digo de todo corazón, dejo con ustedes a un evento creativo, innovador, emprendedor, que forma parte de iCubo. Ustedes dirán, ¿qué es iCubo? I al cuadrado. Nosotros somos la universidad y tenemos que serlo. La universidad, ¿me voy a decir lo mismo? No. La universidad número 1 en emprendimiento de Chile. Eso sí que es un aplauso. Y vamos a understand how here quiero presentar a ustedes al primero voy a presentar al referee, ¿no es cierto? Ya dije ya que es Álvaro Fischer, presidente de la Fundación Chile. And we're excited our teaching boss, Álvaro Fischer, right down. Aplausos, referee. Once more, Álvaro Fischer.
Ya, eso.
Yeah, how are you? How are you, Alvaro?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay.
Good.
Good, huh?
Like a referee.
Okay. Acá para que hay gente en el estadio. Ok. Con ustedes. Ahora sí que sí. Harry, where is the front country? Morin. Con ustedes, Tina. Tina, la grande. Por favor, Tina. Coming, Tina. How are you going? Hi. What am I speaking? Para los que no entienden inglés, se lo puedo decir en chino. Tina, con su entrenador, que es el señor Carlos Barrela. Un aplauso para vos, por favor, para Carlos Barrela, que viene de haberse comido una buena parrilladita. Ay, ¿cómo estuvo la parrillada? Tina, ¿me entiendes algo? Ni roja. Good, Tina, vamos. Con ustedes, señoras y señores, los dejo con el gran Will Designer de Michael. Por favor, Michael, un aplauso. What is his name? Michael Benito con la gran Alejandro Amenábar, que se ve una verdadera caperucita roja. Estupenda. Un aplauso más grande para Michael, un aplauso muy grande para Tina, para Alejandra Amenábar, para Carlos Varela, que será los coach. Dejo a Álvaro Fischer con ustedes, porque él será desde ahora el anfitrión, la persona que dicta las sentencias. Ha sido un agrado, muchas gracias por el apoyo, la buena onda, y nice to meet you. I love you. Álvaro, good luck.
Gracias.
Good luck.
Vasco.
Good luck. Good luck. You know, good luck. ¿Cómo se dice? Buena suerte. Good luck, ¿no?
Así.
Good luck, Tina. Good luck. Yeah.
Tina.
Muchas gracias.
Will you step up?
I love you.
Well, I'm just going to say that we need to have a fair fight here. No shots under the belly line. Okay? You ready? Fine. Our first round. I'm having trouble with my mic here. We're going to have a rock, paper series to decide who's going to go first. Okay? Are you ready for that?
Yep.
Go ahead.
We're going to do 2 out of 3.
You do 2 out of 3. Okay.
Rock, paper, scissors?
One. Two. So you won.
I won.
Okay, so you get to decide. You go first?
Tina goes first.
Okay, that's fine. You can do that. So, the round will go as follows. We will have a debate on the question, should everyone be creative?
Okay, I gotta prepare.
That's not that creative, is it?
I'm preparing.
Okay,
Should everybody? That's a question.
should everyone?
Should everybody be creative? Come on, that's an easy question. That's a softball question.
But you're going to make out something out of it.
Listen, you know what I'm gonna do? I don't need translation into Spanish. Okay, that was distracting.
Okay, but let me just tell you something.
Okay.
I'm going to cut you off.
Okay.
Get 5 minutes, okay? Fine.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I can do it. I don't need 5 minutes. I can convince these people that everyone needs to be creative. You know what? We are all creative from the moment we are born, from the moment we pop out. In fact, think about it. Just our birth, our conception was a creative act, right? Creativity is built into everything we do. And the problem is, when we go to school, it often gets beaten out of us. Right? The teachers put up in classrooms or in rows and columns. The chairs are bolted to the floor. Guess what? That's not what creativity is about. That's not how you learn to be creative. We need to unlock the creativity in everyone. Everyone in any organization, in every place, in every family, in every home has to be creative. Because from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, everything is an opportunity to be creative. Everything. From making your breakfast to how you get to work or school, to how you do your work, everything, every interaction, every word you speak. Think about it. Every sentence you utter is completely unique. No one else has uttered that sentence. Everything you say, every word you say is creative. It's baked into everything you do. So absolutely, everybody needs to be creative.
Is that everything?
That's it.
That's it. Good. Okay. So you got like a 1 minute rebuttal.
No, here's 5 minutes.
He can use his 5 minutes, or either he can use a 1 minute rebuttal, and you can do that afterwards, after his speech.
We're gonna talk. Tina offered a really interesting idea that you're all creative, and I don't doubt that all of you are kind of creative. You maybe popped out creative, but I think the issue is, should we all be creative all the time? And I think it gets to the issue that some of us don't have it beaten down. Some of us hold on to it. Some of us can't help but creative and be extraordinarily creative. I think the point here is recognizing the difference. You have soccer players who are extraordinary. Yeah, we can all hit the ball around, but they're extraordinary soccer players, and we recognize them, and they do wonderful things. But creative people, we sometimes don't recognize them. We often call them the exotic menials, right? These are the people that they design typefaces, they design graphics. There's some industries that prize them, and there are others that don't. There are others that sort of see them as we want to keep them tucked away, safe, and not disturbing things. And I'm saying it's those people that actually need to be recognized, need to be cultivated, and need to be allowed to deal with the larger challenges, that they're able to grasp and understand and make connections that the rest of us always struggle. No matter how much training Tina gives, a lot of us struggle to make these incredible connections that creative people absolutely have. So my point is, it's recognizing creative people, recognizing their special needs in terms of optimizing. In the same way that soccer players train differently than the rest of us, we need to train creative people to be as creative as they possibly can be, and recognize and use them for the large problems that we're facing today. Okay? The idea that there are some of us that are wonderful convergers, that need to make decisions, that work in routines, that do extraordinarily complicated, detailed, mundane tasks that are critical to us. The idea that all of those things should be creative, I don't know if I want a creative bank teller. I want a bank teller who is routine and knows to count money and gives me what's in my account and doesn't create and make up something entirely new. Creativity has its place. We need to recognize it and leverage it. Thank you.
Okay. Because you use up all
I
your
just
time.
need 1 minute.
Okay, go ahead.
I want my bank teller to be creative, don't you? Don't
Yeah.
you want your bank teller to figure out some better way to get your money more efficiently? Maybe the line is really, really long, and the bank teller is the one on the line who sees, wow, if I did it a little different way, all of a sudden, everything would be better. I don't want everyone to just follow instructions. Just following instructions means the status quo. We're in a world that is changing and moving forward. Everybody, at every moment of the day, has an opportunity, and I promise you, I can teach anyone to be creative. There is a set of skills, just like learning how to ride a bike, that you can learn and you can master and become remarkably innovative in everything you do.
Woo!
That's the best shot, Tina. You think that hurt me? Think I'm down? No. The idea that we can all be equally creative is a little like saying, in sports, we're all good. In the U.S., we give everybody a medal. And what does it create? It creates kids that actually have no sense of what good and bad is. So this notion of being able to point to what's truly good as exemplars and recognize it, cultivate it, and it isn't that in other people the knowledge Tina is giving doesn't help us recognize what those gifts are. And now the notion that we want to be creative all the time in everything we do. And in many organizations, and I would say in most organizations, that's a rarity. You have places like Pixar that live on creativity. Every film, every frame is debated and they're looking for alternatives. But when I'm creating ball bearings, I may want creativity a small amount of time, but I need to be able to routinize. I need to be able to optimize. I need to be able to cost reduce. And that perhaps isn't the same kind of mutually collaborative, exploratory, intuitive dimension that Tina's suggesting. It's good to know it, and here's the other piece. To be good at creativity, you've got to do it all the time. Absolutely all the time. And yes, I want some people who do it all the time. I don't know if I want everyone being creative every second of every day. Concern is chaos.
Come on, come on. Don't you guys want to be creative all day? Come on, work with me here. Don't you want to be creative? Raise your hands if you want to be creative. Come on. How many people want to be creative? Come on, raise them high, high in the air. Show me if you want to be creative every day. Take that.
You got something to say to that?
I'm good. I'm good. My case
Okay.
rests.
Round one finished. So now we'll find out what the public, what the audience made out of this debate. Gina's told us that you have to be creative at all times. Even bank tellers should be creative. And Mike has argued for restrictions on creativity. So we want to know now what your thoughts are on this. So if you agree with Tina, give a round of applause for Tina. For Mike. I'm going to write down the points here, and I will tell you after the third round what the result was. Okay. Yep. Ready for round two?
You bet.
Both boxers?
How are you?
Oh, good. So, why don't you step up here? Now we'll decide who starts first this time. We'll do some thumb wrestling. You know how to do that?
Oh, yeah.
Show us.
Compete with that.
Okay, some thumb wrestling. Oh, so you get to choose, Tina. Well done.
I don't think he saw Tina cheating. This creativity all the time? Huh?
I was being creative.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the story.
Yeah,
You've got to tell us a story.
he's going first.
You're going first? That's your decision? Okay,
Decision.
go first.
Okay. What's the question?
There's no question. You have to tell us a story. When were you surprised by creative results of your own?
So, I want to go back to when I was a student. And I was a designer. And I was considered myself a pretty good designer. Pretty creative designer. Loved designing things. Never had any problem coming up with ideas. Something that was really easy to generate, and I was really good at form. And I had my need finding course. We had to go out, understand environments, and see things that were missing, that weren't obvious, and come up with new concepts. Not just design nice things, flashy stuff, but come up with things that were fundamentally different. Wow, big challenge. I was a little scared. So we investigated medical laboratories. That was our challenge, and we were to come up with something completely new in the medical laboratory. So I got in, and I was looking for cool stuff. That's what I wanted to design. I was looking around, and I hung out with the nurses, and the staff, and the lab, and I didn't see anything. And we went day in, day out, and I was looking for cool stuff, and boy, it was tough. This was like nothing I'd ever done before. And presentation was Friday, and it was Thursday, and it was about 2 in the morning, and I had nothing. And I was thinking, I'm toast. I am flunking this course. I'm going to have to call my mom, my dad, right? Sorry about the money. I'm out of the program. And as I was sitting there, feeling sorry for myself, having given up, I noticed something. I noticed a nurse, and she had a pipette, and she had a whole bunch of cups, and she was taking the pipette and putting in an instrument, holding it up, and then writing stuff down and cleaning everything up and doing the next. And I said, I hadn't seen that before. That's really, what are you doing? And she talked about how she had collected urine, and she was finding the specific gravity of urine, and this was what she did. And I went, oh my God. You're using a laboratory process for something that should be batch. It should be just like a production. And you're thinking like it's a lab. And I went, oh my God. I just had that aha moment they all talked about. Design came out of that, presented, turned out to be a digital urine refractometer. I ended up getting patents, got summer job. Here's the point. Not that I was so creative, but that my ego got in the way. All I could think about was how creative I could be. And I had to let go of that in order to see the world clearly. And that's my creative moment. Yeah, that's it. You can top that?
Pee in a cup.
Yeah.
Cool. Really creative.
Little things have big needs.
Okay,
Come on.
okay.
Show us what you got.
Okay. It's not going to be that. So, the place where I get the most inspiration from surprises and creativity is from my students. I have to say, I give them assignments that I have no idea how I would do them. I have no idea. I kind of think they should be able to figure this out, but they give them things that I've never seen before, I've never done before, and in fact, if I was given the assignment, I think I might actually fail. But I give them these assignments, and they do totally remarkable things. It might be as simple as giving them a handful of paper clips and telling them, create as much value as you can from 10 paper clips. Now that one was inspired by a guy who you might know. Do you know the red paperclip guy? The guy who had one red paperclip and he traded it for a house? So I kind of thought, I'm giving them 10 paper clips. There got to be some value there. And the students do totally remarkable things, starting with nothing but a handful of paper clips. Teams came back with computers. They came back with, in almost cars, in just a few days, starting with a handful of paper clips. And so I found that the more open-ended, the more surprising, and the more unusual the assignment I give, the more open-ended, the most amazing things come out of it, because people aren't constrained by what they think they should do with a paperclip or a post-note or a water bottle. They do totally, incredibly remarkable things. So my surprises come not from myself, but they come from crafting assignments that then empower other people to do totally surprising and remarkable things.
The old, my students are creative and I make it happen dodge.
How was that? Is that the ring? I'm up? No. Okay. So obviously that was your answer that you had prepared before. Now I want you to be creative, really creative. Come up with a new story. You just have to make up right now. Who's going to do that first?
I think he's up. Are you up? Or you want me to do it?
Who's creative?
I will. I'm up.
Okay,
I'm up.
go ahead.
No problem. No problem. Okay, so my son. I have a son. My son would actually be very natural in this ring. He's a power lifter. He looks nothing like me. He lifts 590 pounds, won the national record, I'm not kidding, in powerlifting, okay? He's a sprinter at the University of Southern California. And he loves sports. He loves every different sport. And he came to me one day when he was in high school, and he said, Mom, I want to buy a really expensive bicycle. He was a competitive cyclist, like Lance Armstrong, and he wanted a really fancy bicycle. And I said, how nice for you. I'm not going to buy you this bicycle. But I thought, what do I do as a parent? I thought every moment is an opportunity for a creative solution, right? Here I was going to have a fight with my son about whether I was going to buy him a bicycle or not. So I decided to use this opportunity creatively. And I said to him, I want you to figure out how to make me want to buy you that bicycle. Don't ask me to buy the bicycle. Make me beg you to buy that bicycle for you. You have the power to shift the perspective and make me want to buy that expensive bike. So he came back the next day. He said, Mom, I've got a deal for you. He said, if you buy that bicycle for me, I will make dinner for the family 3 nights a week, and I'll do all of my own laundry. So he said, I'll go to the grocery store, I'll buy the food, I'll make dinner, I'll set the table 3 nights a week. He was 16. He said, I'll do it until I go to college, 2 years, and I'll do all my laundry. I did the math. Was it worth it to me? Absolutely. I could not have been happier to buy him that bike. And he held up his end of the deal, and I held up my end of the deal. And we then learned from that, A, that we could be really creative in solving problems, even when it looked like they were intractable, and it also allowed us to build the trust that when we get to the next problem, we were going to be able to solve that one too. Thank you.
Woo.
Mike, you had some cognitive?
No.
Okay.
Boy, relying on the family. Low, Tina. It's really low. I want to talk about students too. And Tina talked about affecting students and having them do remarkable things that she doesn't expect. I've had a little different experience where students surprise you when they come back and they tell you stories of how the work they did changed, and the work they did for you, the work they did in the program, changed how they see the world and act. And it isn't necessarily big things. It's not the big story of I got the big job at Google and made lots of money. They're the little stories. And I had a student, really brilliant software designer, Lori Gupta, and Lori had taken need finding and had kind of realized that part of research, part of this thing called ethnography, is about understanding people from their perspective. Really smart woman. And she was doing some user testing on her software. And she came back and she said, you know, year before I took your course, I'd come up with software and I'd watch people use it, and they'd make mistakes, right? And they do silly things. And she said, I'd sit there and I'd go, God, they're idiots. They're just idiots. Why do I have to design for people who are so stupid? And she said, now I go and I say, stupid me. Because I made the world hard for them. It's my job to not make them feel stupid. I need to make them feel like heroes. Thank you.
Okay. So let's have your round of applause for Tina. For Mike. Okay. Preparing for the next round.
Mejor actor creativa, bueno. Mejor actor creativa, bueno. Puesto que aplauden más que todo. Por eso, bueno, cuando en disquela le ponen minas. Y disco también. Y autos también.
Okay. Prepare for round 3. Step up, please.
I think she's winded. I think she's winded.
We find out who's starting this one first. Some hand slapping. Ready for that?
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Now I understand Tina has practiced with her son.
So what are we going to do?
So everybody gets 3 tries. Okay?
Let's see how long
So after 3, if you don't get me,
Okay.
I go over to you. Okay? So, here we go. She's fast. She's so fast. Woo! Terrible.
Come on, Mike. You can do this.
It's all that fast twitch muscle. Wow. Okay. Is that right? Okay. You need to feel it from the audience. Come on, give me some energy. Okay? Okay, this is it. Here we go. Last one. 3 out of 3. 3 out of 3. Oh!
Okay.
So you choose your.
I'm going to go second.
You want to go second?
Okay.
Okay. This time we're going to have a debate. So you can interrupt the other one. You can do whatever, except. Okay. Debate on the role of constraints in creativity. Is there a role for constraints in creativity, or there is no role for constraints in creativity?
I would argue constraints are critical to creativity. Constraints are essentially the starting point. Creative people, by and large, tend to see the world differently. They tend to be a little on the outside. Right? They sometimes like to be rule breakers. Really bad. And what does a rule breaker need? What does a rule breaker need to start anything? He needs some rules. He and she need some rules. And that's what constraints are. Because those are the rules I'm going to push against. I'm going to find ways around. So imagine, and I'll give you some examples. Michelangelo, right? The David. David started from a giant block of marble that had a huge chunk out of it. Nobody wanted it. None of the other Italian Renaissance artists looked at this chunk of marble and said, I can do anything with it because it's not perfect. I want something that's pure, unconstrained, that will let me envision anything. Michelangelo saw it, and he studied it, and he looked, and the hip of the David came out of that notch, that constraint. It pushed him. It pushed him in ways that the other artists were scared to go. And in my own work, looking at inspiring design, was doing some work for a solar panel company, looking at how solar panels are put on roofs in homes and how they're arrayed. And we'd studied it for a lot of months going on roofs. And we looked at the aesthetics and we looked at the mechanics. And it essentially took 3 to 4 days to get a solar panel array on a roof. Everybody knew that. That was the constraint. That was the starting point. And in a brainstorm, I put a challenge. I said, I'm going to give you a new constraint. The array has to go up in 4 hours. That's it. And it was like, that can't be done. You can't do it. That's crazy. I said, no. It's a brainstorm. We're going to do 4 hours.
That's the new constraint. And they came up with some radical solutions. They were going to bring helicopters and bring the entire collection of rails and panels and put it on the roof. And they had tremendously different approaches of stringing big bungee cables from one edge of the roof to the other and putting the panels on. It ended up coming up with a very different approach of packaging, shipping, and bringing panels. The point was, it was a new constraint. It wasn't we can do anything. It was you have some very strong limitations that you, as a creative, need to push against and find radical alternatives to. Thank you.
Great, Tina. He seems to have a good point there.
Constraints are for wussies. Really, really creative people have no constraints. The sky's the limit. The world's the limit. In fact, really creative people break those rules. Rules are meant to be broken. In fact, most rules are just recommendations. So if you think that you need to be constrained by rules when you're being creative, that is incredibly limiting. Think about it. When you're brainstorming, you want the wildest, the most outrageous, the most crazy ideas, because that's where the really interesting things happen, where you push beyond what's obvious, push beyond those constraints. Think about it. There are studies that show that the further away you get from where you are now, both in your mind and physically and emotionally, the more wild and creative your ideas are. You need to break free from the constraints of your everyday life, from your everyday environment, and think as wildly and openly as possible. Constraints are there, yes, they're a fun tool. Constraints, I know, are a tool when you're brainstorming, but really they're there to allow you to get to wild places, like say, how would you do this in 4 hours? Or how would you do it in 4 years? Or how would you do it with $10? Or how would you do it with $1 million? Those are great constraints to get you thinking, but they're certainly not meant to anchor you. They're meant to get you thinking in wildly divergent ways. So I repeat, constraints are for wussies.
Surely real life does have constraints of all sorts. So how do you deal with them?
Okay, how do I deal with that? The fact is, when you are brainstorming and coming up with ideas, it doesn't cost a penny. You're in the exploration stage. You're not in the exploitation stage where you're actually going to decide what you're going to do. So when you're actually brainstorming and coming up with ideas, you should have no constraints. Yes, in real life, when you start making some decisions, those constraints start coming in. For example, when you have your marble. But when you're planning and thinking about what you might do, you should not let the constraints get in the way.
So what do you have to say about that? Because if you put some constraints on whatever you're doing, you surely are blocking your mind out of some of the options, aren't you?
Maybe, maybe not. Notice, by the way, that Tina's starting to use pejoratives. She's not a good sign. So, let me talk about some evidence of where we see astonishing creativity. Creativity in the world of chess. Is chess a creative activity? Brilliant people. And it's the most constrained phenomena imaginable. And yet within those constraints, phenomenal creativity happens. I talked about Pixar being a remarkable firm, right? Creating amazing films. They don't reinvent filmmaking every time. They're constraints. Those constraints give them a backdrop against which they can apply real creativity, focused creativity, push boundaries. If there are no boundaries, you wallow. You have nowhere to begin. And in fact, what we've seen is when you offer problems, and imagine in your own life, I have no constraints, no time limits, you get the work done. The constraint of time limit, the stress, the challenge makes you do better. Right? It's that stress, that critical stress that we see from constraints that I would argue enables creativity, not undermines it.
Well, what about thinking out of the box? How do you get there if you have put just constraints on yourself?
But I have a box to start with, don't I? I have a box that I need to get out of. I already know what the constraints are against which I need to push. And I would argue real innovation is about figuring out not what's outside the box, not what's novel, It's about realizing the box is always moving. Right? The box is the norm, and I want to create new norms with the things I create. I, in fact, want to find ways of creating things inside the next box, the next side of constraints. Constraints are something that are critical to creating our future.
But Tina, if you have no constraints, how do you focus on the problem that you're facing?
Well, of course, we use constraints as a tool. But they're a tool like a hammer or a screwdriver, and I don't use them all the time. The fact is, yes, you might want to rely on them to help you push yourself in certain directions. But when you are generating ideas, you should not feel constrained by those tools. You should use an entire toolbox. You can make your own tools. You can go anywhere to really push the limits.
Okay, so now I'll give you a 1-minute final and closing remark on this round. So Mike?
So, think in your own life when you've had certain constraints. And whether you're a student or an instructor, and you initially hate the constraint, like Tina, you absolutely go, God, I wish it wasn't there. I wish I could just do whatever I wanted. And then, like me, in that laboratory looking at urine refractometers with that deadline, right? The deadline, it was tomorrow, because trust me, if I didn't have that deadline, I would have gone home, gotten a brew, found something else to do. I never would have come to that decision. It was the constraint of having to present in front of a client, and a client who's going to judge me, a client who had his own sets of constraints that forced me to sit and focus and sweat and agonize and rethink who I was and get to a place where I got beyond all that. And at the end, constraints weren't the issue. I'd gotten to some place very creative, very different, but I needed all that other stuff to keep me on track.
Tina, your final remarks.
Final remarks on this. Constraints are designed to be pushed against.